All right, what are we doing, brother?
All right, my name is Galen. I work at Phoenix Knives. You might have seen me yesterday with Lance out lunching a trebuchet at the castle. Here's where we make it pretty. We work the magic back here. So the first thing I do is dip it in water. The friction from this 60 grit sandpaper belt will evaporate this water off. It boils at 212 degrees. And I like to keep my fingers from getting too warm. You can see quickly how that water is evaporating across that blade. 212 degrees moving across. As it gets closer and closer to my fingers, I know it's time to dip it in the water. Sometimes you'll see me get my thumbs in water when I don't get to it in time. What we're doing is called profiling the blade. We're giving it nice straight parallel lines. Give it a nice point and a nice little upsweep. Now we need to start thinning it out because that's not going to cut much more than Play-Doh. We're going to swap over. Now we run 60 grit belt. The grit number on a sandpaper belt or on a piece of sandpaper has to do with the square inch on the belt. So for a 1 inch by 1 inch square, it tells you how many grains of that grit, or whether it be a mineral like garnet, diamond, or synthetic like we use, which tends to last a little bit longer and not be as expensive as diamond. But it tells you for every square inch how many grains are in there. So this has 60, so they can be rather large. The lower the number, the bigger the pieces to fit in that square inch. The higher the number, the smaller they have to be because they're going to fit the same size. So this is another 60 grit. We start out with an older one because pressing it sideways on there scrapes a lot of the grit off. But now we're going to work on taking metal off of the sides of the blade. The thinner we can make it, the better it's going to cut. So we want to thin this out. The cutting edge should be about half as thick as a dime. Just real quickly, you can see we've taken a lot of the thickness out of that blade. It started out this thick. Now here it's a little bit thin there. This is about the thickness we're looking for. I'll quickly just run across that. Now we have a nice even thickness throughout. But now I want to bring this line back. This is what we call our blade road. We have a plunge grind line here. This is where the handle meets the blade. But this blade road is going to give you that nice silver area. The back of the knife we're going to leave. This shows the hammer marks, what we call brute de forge. And we like to leave those so you can see that it's a hand-hammered blade. Where we take metal off is determined by where we put pressure. So I'm putting more pressure on the bottom of this blade as I press it up. And you can see it moving that line up the blade. I'll be working one side now until I get it to where I want it, and then I'll turn it around and make the other side match. But I've already got the center line established, so I won't be taking any more meat from the width of the blade. And this process takes several passes when people tend to get bored, and I usually start asking, what do you do for a living? What do you do when you're not making knives?
Well, right now we're making a movie.
Well, one thing I haven't asked you is where you coming in from.
Well, originally I'm from Washington State. But now we live in Las Vegas, Nevada, and do productions out of there, and Los Angeles, and wherever else they're making movies.
I have a brother that lives in Vegas. I was in Los Angeles area for a while when I was in the military recruiting. Recruited actually in Hawthorne near South Central before moving up to Thousand Oaks in the Agora Hills. So now you can see we have a nice shiny area of the blade, nice and thin. We'll polish it out a little bit later. I'm going to get this line just a little bit straighter there, but I'm going to start bringing this line up to meet this side so it looks good on both sides. Straighten out that line just a little bit. I don't want to take too much more off of that side because, like I said, we like that brute de forge. Leave a little bit of that hammer mark in there. bit, makes a little adjustment here. I'm going to slow this down. The thinner the blade gets, the more friction the speed causes and makes it heat up a lot more on my hand. So we'll slow it down so we don't get as much friction. That way we can roll this line up for a consistent tip. And to do that, I got to hold my finger on here just a little bit longer as I roll it in. And it tends to get a little warm. This is when we decide whether we really want to make knives. We get hot thumbs. Tap here, then we'll start in our polishing. Okay, so now we have our blade shaped. Now we're going to move up to 220 grit sandpaper for the polishing. Now you see these little areas in here that look like cracks. This is really a non-hardenable steel. It's an A36 steel. Horseshoes can't really be hardened, otherwise if a horse hit a rock, it would cause a spark, maybe set the field on fire. Or if you're galloping across concrete, it would go sliding across the concrete. So we don't worry about these. That's actually a place where there was another horseshoe nail hole there. And the lines that you see on this side are from the pattern here, which thins out the horseshoe and makes it lighter. Nothing to be concerned about. Like I said, this is not a hardenable steel. So we don't have to worry about the things that they do on forged and fire, smashing them into rocks. We can chuck it in a vise and it would bend. But it does make a good souvenir knife, and it's mainly for the experience to see what a blacksmith does, give you a little bit of taste of hammering out a knife, and you get a beautiful little souvenir. Now the 220 grit in that same square inch we talked about now is going to have 220 grains, so they're almost 4 times smaller than the 60 grit. And now we're looking at the smoother we can make the blade, the smoother the sides are, the less friction in the cut, and it'll make it feel that much sharper. It doesn't take much once we've got the blade shaped to take those high marks out. We'll try to get as many as we can. You can see a real glint of light in there. Makes it nice and pretty. And we still haven't started to sharpen our blade yet. So the next of my standard questions with most of my customers would be, especially with the young ones, do you have any knives? Because sometimes the 6-year-olds never had a knife before, even though this is Texas. And the next question I ask them if they do have a knife or if they've never had a knife is, if you drop this on your foot, how many toes would you like to cut off? Gives me an indication of how responsible they are, especially if they say 10, which is the correct answer. I just won't drop it on my foot.
Well, all my kids play with knives, machetes, and from ages 6 on up.
It's good to learn at an early age.
Well, like anything else, I think.
I know an 8-year-old that does competition shooting, he's a scary good shot. So now I'm just rolling this on the back of the blade. It takes off any burrs that are in the back. A lot of time that hammering leaves sharp edges, and we don't want any sharp edges in areas that we might stick our thumb. Hopefully we're not sticking our thumb on the sharp side. We like to get these what I call stupid sharp, meaning if you touch it there, you're stupid. But we're going to slow this down just a little bit more and start cutting in our blade bevel. Now we use a 22.5-degree bevel. I call it the half a pizza slice. A lot of 6-year-olds don't understand geometry. They couldn't tell you that a circle has 360 degrees, and if you divide that into 8 slices, you come out with 45-degree slices. So I tell them, you take a pizza, you slice it into 8 pieces. When you look down that blade, you should be looking at half a slice of pizza. The 10-inch will give us a nice hollow grind, and then putting an apple seed edge, which is a kind of a shape like this, it's rounded over the edge, gives us a really nice, strong knife. Even though, because of it being A36 steel and non-hardening steel, it's not going to keep an edge very long. It is easy to sharpen. It's a good blade to practice sharpening, especially if you have kids that have never sharpened a knife before. It shows them real quick what they're doing right, what they're doing wrong. As I'm sharpening, I'm looking for, this belt moves around this way and comes at me. It pulls metal from the bottom of that blade out to the edge. When it gets sharp, it starts developing a real light, cottony looking line along the edge. I don't know if that's picking it up in that light.
Not really.
But it gets a very light edge all along. It's little bits of metal that are flaking off. Once we start seeing those, that edge is as sharp as it can be with this belt. We'll move up to an 800 grit belt. Now from that 220, we're going 4 times smaller in that same square inch. So now we've got 800 pieces in that little spot. This one takes off metal and looks like you're taking graphite from a pencil. I can put my finger on here and I get nothing but little black specks of metal. This is very fine, but it is metal, and that's the small pieces that this belt is taking off. So all this is going to do is flatten out the high points from that 220 grit. It's going to give it a mirror edge all along that edge. Makes it very smooth. The smoother we get it, the easier it's going to cut. And this makes it razor sharp. And the very last thing we do is take a leather belt to it. It's called a strop. Now leather is a very strong material, but it doesn't have any sharpness to it. It's not going to cut into our steel in any way. I can turn this on. I can take this cleat that's here, press it into that belt, and it doesn't even polish it. But leather is very strong, and all these little metal flakes we have here out on the edge, sometimes we develop splinters that hang on. The leather's strong enough to break those points off to make sure if we're using this for an apple or a steak later, we're not going to get any metal bits in our mouth or in the cut, which wouldn't be a good thing. So that just knocks them off. Now a lot of times you'll see a barber take a razor and they'll strop it across a leather belt like this. Razors are very thin, and if they get a little bump, get a little bend, that can cause a deep gouge when they go to shave you. By running it down a leather strop like this, it pulls that edge into direct alignment all along the center of that blade. Make sure it's centered exactly in the center so there aren't any little depressed areas, anything that's going to cause you a nick. The very final thing we do is, because this does have a small amount of carbon, it will rust. We can see a little bit of redness in here where rust is developed, just in us dipping it in the water and working with it. So we come over, we have a rag, we put a little bit of oil on it. We use a food grade mineral oil, but you can use anything like vegetable oil, you can use olive oil, any of your kitchen oils, safflower oil, sunflower oil, coconut oil. People always laugh because I do the Forrest Gump scene with Blue where I just list all the different kinds of oil. So you can put mineral oil, baby oil, motor oil, 3-in-1 oil. I don't know which ones I missed.
Amsoil.
But it has to end in oil. Oil of Olay is soap and begins in oil. Don't use oil of Olay. But you just put a thin coat, get it all over the handle. That'll help protect it from rust. We do this on our black metal about once a month, especially if it's exposed to air. that metal will evaporate after a while, or not the metal, but the oil will evaporate after a while. But real quickly, we've turned out a very beautiful souvenir traditional drop point knife. We put it in a sheath and we give out a sticker for your bag, your toolbox, or whatever. When we put it in here, we suggest not putting your hand here. The leather's very thin. If you push it down, you poke a hole in your hand, makes a nasty little cut. We have to heat up a metal rod, cauterize the wound, it smells terrible. So we squeeze it a little bit on the side, wiggle that blade down in there until it gets all the way in the bottom, and it can hang around your neck. It has several different grommets. You can tie it this way and hang it on a belt. You can tie it across two of them like this and hang it as a cross draw.
Oh, cool.
You can run them across the two outer and have it across the back. So gives you a few different options of what you like to do. But then we present it to the owner, the maker,
Awesome.
which is Lance.
Okay, let me try to get this switched around here. Since I lost my photographer, my
So now you
cinematographer.
have your
So there you have it, guys. Thank you very much for our tutorial, and this was amazing and a lot of fun to do. I hope you like it. Like, follow, share the heck out of it. And we're working on Devil's Night, and this is just one of the stops along our way and making movies, guys. Hope you like it.